Welcome to Decision Space, a podcast about the decisions in games. This is the only show that takes place right here in the decision space between the turns of your favorite game. I'm Jake.
I'm Brendan.
And I'm Jamey.
And today we are talking with Jamey Stegmaier about the value of board games. Jamey, thank you so much for coming on the show. We are absolutely delighted to have you on.
Yeah, it's one of your first few episodes, so I'm honored to join you for this.
Yeah, you're actually the first guest we're having on, so no pressure to any follow-ups after this. I'll go ahead and just introduce you to our audience in case there's anyone out there who doesn't know who you are. Jamey Stegmaier is the president and CEO of Stonemaier Games, responsible for such mega hit as Wingspan, which has personally brought people in my life into the board gaming hobby, which is fantastic. If that wasn't enough, you're also the designer of 2 board games in the top 25 games of all time on Board Game Geek, Scythe and Viticulture. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, you are a man who has never beaten me at disc golf, though you're getting closer.
Most importantly, yeah.
Well, I want to give you opportunity at the start. I think this show is going to come out simultaneously with some big news from Stonemaier Games. So would you want to maybe briefly touch on the pre-order you got going on?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, we have 10, well, you didn't mention this. We have 10 games so far at Stonemaier Games, and our 11th game will be Red Rising, which is a game that I co-designed based on an IP, a book series called Red Rising that I really, really love and have tried to make this game for a long, long time. So I'm so excited to finally be able to bring it to people. We've already made the game. We fully designed it, and it'll be available for pre-order on March 3rd.
Can I just really quickly say, too, that I think the art in Red Rising, the presentation of it is just gorgeous, Jamey. The card that Jake shared on his Instagram, I was like, wow, this is so beautiful. It just pulled me in instantaneously.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a fun process because I worked with a few artists that really knew that world. And so that was easy for me as a publisher. I didn't have to give them very specific instructions. They kind of just created art based on what they knew about the world. But yeah, thank you. I'm glad you enjoy it. Have either of you read the books? Oh, Jake, you've mentioned to me that you're getting to it after you read Dune, right?
That's right. So
yes,
it could be many months still, but okay. I do plan to read it.
Yeah. And Brendan, have you read it? No.
I haven't. No, I'm intrigued though.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am excited about the game, and that will actually be live for pre-order on the Stonemaier website simultaneous with the release of this episode. So I think If you get, maybe 2 or 3 more orders than you were expecting, you can just credit that right back to us.
Sure.
But I also wanted to mention so I work in nonprofit fundraising space, and you did one thing that I thought was just amazing in association with the release of this game, which was giving just a tremendous contribution to the ACLU. So I wanted to highlight that and maybe just give you a second if you wanted to briefly mention why you wanted to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the subject matter for this game, I guess the world of Red Rising is a dystopian world, and it's kind of an allegory about civil liberties and race. And so I thought I'd try to do something good with the game from the start. And so for every person who signed up for a pre-order launch notification in the first 2 weeks when I was announcing what the game is, we donated $1 to the ACLU to help protect those civil liberties that we hold so dear in America and hopefully around the world. And so we ended up donating, thanks to the people who signed up, we donated a little over $10,000 to the ACLU. I got a nice note from the Missouri branch of the ACLU about that. And yeah, just felt good to do. I think we'll make way more money than that in the pre-order. And so it just felt good to give a little bit of that back to a great cause.
That's amazing. And as, a Missouri resident, somebody who's, passionate about protecting civil liberties and, knowing, we can do so much more in this state and country, that means a lot. And it's just, a fantastic gift. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jamey.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into the main topic today. I figured since we have Jamey here with us, somebody who knows a lot about the marketplace value of board games, we could get into the topic of the value of games, but with a little caveat. Instead of talking about economics, I thought it'd be fun to talk about kind of the value games bring to our lives, why we personally choose to play games, and why we think this is a great hobby for others to take part in. while we're focused on decisions in games on this podcast, I think it might also be relevant to our listeners, the decision to play games. So how does that sound to y'all?
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Great. So we'll just do like kind of a round table, taking turns, giving one of the reasons we play games and then discussing amongst ourselves those reasons. So Jamey, the floor is yours if you want to get us started.
Sure. Yeah. I have two answers that will be related to me as a gamer and one related to me as a game designer. The first one kind of ties probably the closest to your podcast. And it is one of the things that I really value about games is low stakes problem solving. I think, in our jobs and our lives, our relationships, we have in real life, we have plenty of problems that we solve on a daily basis, and they are ranging from, medium to high stakes often. But in games, I love that I can have these decisions that thematically are momentous, but they are very low stakes. If I lose the game, if I make a bad choice in a game, I can clean up the game and kind of forget about it and try it again, or maybe think about it and try a different strategy the next time I play. And so I love that games provide me that opportunity to make really interesting, sometimes really dumb decisions, but in a low stakes situation. Can you guys relate at all to that in the games that you play?
Yeah, absolutely. That's close to one of mine, which is like I feel like games give you the opportunity to like make an impact in something, and then like it gives you instant feedback about the decisions you made. Or I feel like when you're talking about like the decisions you make in life, you could go your whole life and not know if that was like the optimal outcome or not. And I love that about games. I feel like because of, the just vast amount of information we're getting and consuming from all angles, like board games, one space where like that is distilled and I can actually get feedback on a decision I've made. And I feel like that's something I don't get in a lot of other places.
I really like too, Jamey, that you use the word low stakes, because I think that to me sort of highlights the ability for us to take meaningful risks within the systems that we might not take in a high stakes environment. And that's something I love about games. I like the opportunity to take risky decisions that I can be punished for, but not have it be truly punishing. It's sort of that's a really interesting way to explore, I think, human inclinations that we have that we might not necessarily feel comfortable taking outside of the space of a game, which is really interesting that games provide that space for us.
Yeah, I totally. Yeah, it's a safe space to make those decisions, and I like that even within different types of games, those decisions, like within that low stake range, there can be like low to high stakes within that range. Like if you're playing a legacy game where you make a decision, it could have a long-term impact over the next 10 games that you play. If you're playing a 15-minute game, a filler game, versus a Twilight Imperium, like a 6-hour game, those decisions can even have that range. They're still low stakes, but it can impact like a longer amount of time when you're playing those games.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so interesting how that itself sort of, I have to wonder if we'll get back to talking about the way in which games informs just the way we live life in general. That seems to be a theme on our podcast already. But it's interesting how sort of the different versions of the games, whether it's legacy games or something longer like Twilight Imperium that's contained in one space, or like I'm just playing a game of Rummy with my family and I'm going to take a weird risk, allow us to explore the consequences of decisions we make generally in different venues of our life, right? Like the decisions we make in life in general also have varying degrees of consequences based on the type of decision. So it's interesting.
Right.
Jake, why are you giggling?
I don't know. I just think it's an interesting conversation. I was just enjoying it. Brendan, why don't you give us your first one, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so my first one, a huge reason why I value playing games is interaction. I think that games, and there's two threads to that. One is interaction with other human beings. That's obviously a huge reason why I play games. I love that, especially board games, bring me into interaction with other people, whether it's family, friends. I also really value the interaction of games as a medium. There aren't any other types of media really that give you feedback. So even if other people aren't involved with the game, I am physically having feedback based on my game playing experience. I'm interacting with a piece of media that I might not interact with in the same way I would a book or a movie or music. And I really love that about games, that they talk back and they have personalities in that way.
As an extension of that, there's also the interactions within the gaming community. like what you guys are doing right now. You're having conversations based on these topics that you're really focusing on, and having people comment on them. And I love that there is a pretty wonderful community of people on different forums, different platforms, where you can really dive deep into a specific game that you love, or a specific type of game. I think that's I love talking about games, and I like that there are platforms to do that and ways to do that within the gaming community.
Yeah, definitely same. It's pretty amazing that just because of our affection, just people who are in the community generally, our affection for games brings us together. Like the fact that the three of us are sitting here talking is in some way in its most basic form just because we like playing games. And that's really powerful that it comes from that sort of core level of we value playing games, and that has led us to having this conversation together.
Yeah. I want to highlight too, like the interactions we have with our friends playing games are unlike interactions that you get to have with friends in almost any other setting. Like I think back to when I first joined this hobby in a serious way back in like 2015. I was 23, and basically hanging out with friends meant like getting together and drinking beer, or like going to a bar and drinking beer. And like, you'd have like sometimes like funny conversations, but those interactions like were not super fulfilling to me. And all of a sudden, when I was like introduced to board games and started playing these games with friends, and like I almost like realized anew why I enjoyed the company of my friends so much, because it just presented the opportunity for them to be clever and outwit me in a way that would not happen at a bar. And or just so I just love that playground to like explore those interactions and honestly enjoy the relationships in your life in a meaningful way, at least to me.
Generally in life, I don't want my friends to be underhanded or conniving. But when I'm playing the Resistance, I love exploring that side of my friend's personality, right? Like I have vivid memories of games of the Resistance or even Cosmic Encounter where my friends have done things where if they did those things in real life, I don't know that they would be my friends. But it makes me appreciate them so much more as human beings. And it's so cool that they get to explore those sort of that aspect of themselves through games. That's interesting.
Yeah, I love being devious and mischievous in certain games. In real life, I do not like being devious or mischievous at all. Yeah. That is not fun for me in real life, or fun to do the people I care about. But in games, I really enjoy that. Again, it goes back to the low stakes element too. Low stakes interactions. Yeah. As long as every now and then I have seen it carry over outside the game, and I try to be aware of that, because it can carry over a little bit when you have these Resistance style games where you might betray someone. Usually it remains within the safe space of the game.
It's group dependent for sure.
Definitely.
Okay, I'm going to bring up one of mine, which is maybe a smaller topic, but one thing that like I really value about games is the physicality of them. Like I love touching things. I feel like at its most basic level, like a well-produced game. I was just playing Sagrada for the first time last night. And one thing I just loved about that game is when I drafted a die and placed it into my player board, there was like a satisfying click into place that it was like perfectly secured and, permanent in that space. And I just love that about it. And I feel like in our increasingly digital world, which has been heightened to an extreme extent during the pandemic, I've been working from home. Like there just aren't that much. I mean, there are certain like hobbies, but there just aren't that many opportunities to just like play with your hands and manipulate the board. And I think that really is something that I can't describe exactly why, but it's meaningful and brings value to me in games.
Yeah, even the tactile nature of shuffling a really nice deck of cards, going back to Red Rising for a second, people have asked a lot about, can I sleeve the cards? Will they fit into the box? Can I sleeve these cards? And I get that, but I love the feel of shuffling the cards in Red Rising. It's just, they're slightly bigger cards. They shuffle really well. And that goes for the case for many games. But that tactile nature feels so good compared. I mean, it's handy in digital format that it does it for you. But I love that feel of shuffling a good deck of cards together.
Yeah. And I love holding cards in my hand. I didn't want to bring this up, but I'm like a little bit opposed to the card holders in Red Rising, because like holding, this goes back to my roots as a Magic player, but like doing like the hand shuffle thing, it's like that's like a big part of the game to me. But I guess I could always just choose not to use it personally.
True.
It's very interesting to me how physical games have become so prominent in our lives, as like we increasingly live in a digital world. And I've noticed that my wife and I have just been playing more games this year. It's probably a product of having more free time while we're at home, but it's also just a product of wanting to engage with physical things after spending so much time all the time in that virtual space. I also, you two are talking about the feel of cards, and I love the feel of cards, but I also love the smell of cards, the smell of freshly printed cards. It's such a strange thing to talk about, because if someone doesn't get it, they just don't get it, right? There's someone out there who's listening to this podcast and they're like, why is this weirdo talking about smelling his cards? But there's something so joyful and nostalgic about the smell of freshly printed cards that I don't know. It's just one of those perfect smells to me, like an old book.
That's like a next level board game component, was like pumped in smells like they do at Disneyland or something. All right, Jamey, do you want to give us your next one?
Yeah. It piggybacks off what Brendan said a little bit, which is I am very much so an introvert. And so Brendan mentioned interactions. I would add a word to that for me that I really love. I love the structured interactions that games present for me as an introvert. For example, as an introvert, I don't love small talk. If I'm at a bar with a few friends, Jake, like you gave that example, I have a good time. But in small talk, something just feels not right to me. I'm a little uncomfortable. I want to have more structure to that. And games provide me that structure. We have something here that we've all decided that we are going to do this thing together. There are rules to it. We're going to play it together. We're going to talk about it while we're playing. It's like a built-in conversation topic. And so as an introvert who likes to see people and be with other people, it gives me really the ideal structure for interactions that I enjoy and get fulfillment out of. So that's probably, that would be number one on my list if I were to rank this, because that has made such a positive impact on my life in terms of social interactions.
That's awesome. I love that, Jamey. And I do really like the structure of the type of interactions that we have. And it's so interesting because to me, it kind of goes back to the magic circle that we were talking about with the resistance in a way.
Yeah.
That there's sometimes when you're having interactions that are based on small talk, there's not that sort of similar like social covenant of like we're agreeing on what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Whereas a game instantly is this agreement between people that we're doing this thing together. And our goal is to have a positive experience in the outcome, or to at least be playing the game because we care to be playing the game, right? So it creates that common ground, even if before you've even started playing the game. Once you agree, you have something in common. That's interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree as well. And I think one of the ones that I have on my list that I'll just touch on now is I feel like that structure too provides like a benefit to people almost at any age and or stage in life. When you're a kid, engaging in that structure is like, kids play. It's the most natural thing in the world to like start learning about like, how to be a member of society. And I think that's really important. Mm-hmm. But I think even, as adults, the age I'm at now, I feel like I really am still able to continue to develop those super important like emotional intelligence skills that are like really valuable to my work as a professional, to my relationships and like, being a better friend, a better husband. I think that, games are an incredibly important avenue to practice that. And, it all to me, comes back to like the practice of that magic circle and existing within a structure that we're all agreeing to.
I have educators reach out to me from time to time for me to like recommend a game to them for their classroom that can teach their kids something. And I'll often mention games from a few other companies, like Genius Games makes games that are focused on like science. They teach a specific element of science. But I think games in general, a lot of games teach great communication skills. Many, many games. So I have a bunch to recommend when I ask about that. But that ties directly into what you said there, Jake, about kind of life skills, the skills that we can pull out of having those experiences with games.
I feel like we won't explore this aspect of this, where this conversation could potentially go, because it gets very scholarly. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of good work by the Dutch writer John Huizinga he wrote Homo Ludens, which basically means man the player. Mm-hmm. And he looks at like why it's a really scholarly work from the 30s on like why do people play? And his whole thing is that the games existed even before culture, before like animals play too. And in some ways the theory is that like animals play literally because it helps us learn things in a safe environment. And I think the fact that Jake, you're bringing up, like, it gives me a chance to learn how to do these different things I think that goes back to one of the core reasons that maybe games started existing in the first place. And it goes to the sort of low risk nature that Jamey, you brought up at the outset, right? It's like a safe environment to try things and learn at its most core level.
Yeah. That's really cool. I haven't heard of that. Homo ludens?
Homo ludens, yeah. Maybe in the future we can explore that topic more in depth.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So my next one, there's a few different ways that this could potentially go. But I think one reason why I really value playing games is I think on some level, playing games and having fun, some percentage of that fun just converts to joy for me. And I like feeling joy. It's such a basic thing. And there's so many reasons to play games. And we've covered a lot of them here. You could play games because you want to feel sad. And I think they can evoke those emotions. But for me, the reason why in my almost every day of my life for I don't know how many days I play games is because I like the joy that they let me feel when I make decisions in them. It makes me happy. It's like such a basic reason.
I'm glad somebody said it. Yeah, games are fun, and that's like a super valid reason to play them, if not the most important. I'll add to that with my next one, which is I think one of the things that makes games fun to me is it's kind of two parts, but it's a healthy competitive outlet too. And in that, like, games are fun because I can see myself growing and improving in a really concrete way. You know, I can make leaps in my learning and logic in the way I'm thinking about games. That to me is like really fun and satisfying. You know, there's almost nothing in gaming I like more than realizing something new about a game system where I'm like, oh, I should not do that at this point in the game because of this new knowledge I have. And, you know, just that moment of like learning something new is like, I will never get old. That will never grow old for me. I just love it.
Yeah, I actually tying those two things together. I get a lot of joy from games when I have those moments of either feeling cleverness or solving a little problem, or even just like filling an objective card or a mission card in a game. Where that little mini burst of just a satisfaction that I completed this thing that I worked towards for a few turns. That makes me happy, and I love that games give me that opportunity.
Gets the endorphins going a little bit.
Endorphins, yeah. That's what I was thinking adrenaline. I was like, that's not right. Endorphins, yeah.
From a game design perspective, I think it's really interesting to think about this concept generally, just as the type of games that we've been as a culture been playing and making and how they relate to the completion of goals. I think goal driven game design, because that's what players like playing or that's what the marketplace seems to encourage, are being made more and more, right? Like the games that people played historically, there was probably less of an opportunity for the sense of achievement as repeatedly as there are currently. I would have to dive into this, but something like chess or even Go, I would think have fewer opportunities of really high moments of objective elation from like completing an objective and then having a payoff. And I think culturally, that's a really interesting moment that there'll probably be more study on as this trend potentially continues. Or I'm just thinking even like I've started playing a little bit of Magic the Gathering again recently, for better or worse. And a lot of the way that the digital client Magic Arena works is to constantly reward me and make me feel good about the choices that I've made in the game to keep that going. And as much as I know that that's happening, the sort of Skinner box, and I know what they're the tricks that Wizards of the Coast is using to make it work, part of my brain that cares about that and the part of my brain that knows are really different. And the part of my brain that likes the feeling doesn't really care that intellectually I know I'm being psychologically encouraged to do this repeatedly.
It's like eating junk food or fast food. It's like your brain knows what's happening, but like that doesn't make it not taste good.
Yep. And the growth still feels good. And it's sort of like, I really like the sense of mastery is really important to why I play games too. I think it's what drew me to playing Keyforge and sort of meeting you, Jake. And it's what has drawn me to sort of playing other games competitively. And I love that games have room for all different types of experiences too. Not all games for me have to be mastery, but when I do, my brain really likes that. I guess to jump off of it too, that idea, another one, I really like playing games because they are a consistent way that I can get into a state of flow. So I know for some people, I just watched Pixar's Soul, And that's a movie that the main character, the protagonist, gets into a flow state by playing the piano. It's a fantastic movie, and it's pretty important to the plot, that flow state. But for me, games are the way that I most reliably get into that, and it's just a fun place to exist.
That's like up there at number probably 1 or 2 on my list of game design philosophies. I love the idea of getting players into that flow, and it's one of the reasons in most of our games that we don't have phase-based turns where you're doing 5 different things on your turn, one phase at a time or a step at a time. And the reason that we don't often have rounds in our turns, because I like the flow where you just do one simple thing on your turn and then it's the next player's turn. And then they do one simple thing and then it's the next player's turn. I know different games do this in different ways. You mentioned Keyforge does this on a completely different way. But I love getting in that flow of the game where you stop almost thinking about that it is a game, because you're just thinking about all the interesting things that you're doing or being immersed in the theme, however you want to be immersed in it. Yeah, I think about flow all the time. I like that you brought that up.
That's really interesting, Jamie, too. That I know we don't want to go too off on a tangent here, Jake, but that rounds can sort of be a barrier to flow because the physical structure of the game sort of stops your brain from acting. I hadn't considered that. That's really interesting.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting too. And I think a lot about sports. I'm a big fan of playing sports, and you think about the difference between soccer, is a game that's basically just constant play, and American football, where it's just so broken up, and can be really disorienting for people that aren't really entrenched in that hobby or knowledge to get into, because it's so disruptive to watch a game. Whereas anybody can tune into soccer and at least know what's going on.
Yeah,
maybe not relevant.
No, definitely. There's a big difference. Yeah.
I think that's super relevant too. As someone who grew up playing baseball and soccer, I think that my brain was in something closer to a flow state more often than soccer. There are things I loved about playing baseball, but the way that it was broken up in that sort of round-based structure, I think it just, your brain is in a different space. It's way more tactical in that sense.
I never picked flowers on the soccer field, but I definitely did sitting out in right field as a little leaguer.
Yeah.
All right, Jamie, do you have another one? Maybe we could do one more. Or I guess we're pretty close to the end of the time here. I'll leave it to you.
Well, let's finish off our list.
Okay, great.
This is a really great discussion. And that does tie into my last element, which is the one that I want to answer from a game designer perspective, which is that a huge reason I value games is that I learn from other designers and other publishers. I've learned so much, and I've been inspired so many times by game after game. I try to credit games whenever I come out with a new game. I often say this idea came from Terra Mystica, or this idea came from Fantasy Realms, because I want people to discover those great games, and because my games wouldn't exist without the foundation those games laid out for me. And so I often, when I'm playing games, I'm having fun as a gamer, as a person, but I'm also paying attention to those moments of fun, those moments of frustration, and trying to learn from them so I either repeat or recreate those moments of fun and avoid those moments of frustration in the games that I create. So that is really a big part of the reason I play games, because I want to learn from them as a designer.
That's fantastic. And I think I can really relate to that in just doing this show even. Because, I've always really been interested in thinking about mechanics, and that's the reason why I want to try a bunch of different things. That's why I don't just, my collection isn't 3 games. It's, approaching 100, because I want to try out all these new different things. But in starting this show and really thinking more critically about the decisions I'm making as I'm making them and why they're fun or not fun, has kind of made me appreciate old games anew, and just, trying to explore and learn from them in that way. I know Brendan's a game designer too, so I'm sure he has thoughts.
Well, I'm really curious. So a lot of what we've been talking about, Jamie, we've been talking about sort of intellectual stimulation and emotional stimulation, and how both those sides of the coin are really important to why we play games. Yeah. Do you feel like this sort of existing in and playing games to learn from other designers, or other designs, and then to be in conversation with that and build on that? Do you feel like when you're doing that, you're existing in both those spaces, intellectual, emotional, in one of those spaces more than the other? How, if you had to sort of characterize it, how would you?
It often depends on how many times I've played the game. So if I play a lot of games one time, and when I do that, I would say I lean a little bit more towards the kind of the intellectual, the game design part of my brain. But I also, even then, I try to pay attention to my emotional responses because I'm looking for that fun or that frustration. But the deeper I go into a game, I've played Terra Mystica, dozens and dozens of times at this point. I love that game. And I no longer really think about it from the game design perspective at all. I am just enjoying the strategy of it, the immersion of it. As a gamer. So I think it depends a lot on how many times I played the game.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Brendan, do you have one more?
I do. My last one might not be the best capstone one, but I think one thing that I wanted to bring up is I play games because I really enjoy pattern completion. And I think games are a really interesting outlet for that. It depends on the game, obviously. And this goes back to a little bit the objective, but I think that as humans, we like making order out of chaos, and we like putting things in their places. And games are a really convenient way for us to experience the sensation that comes along with like putting things where they should be. Something as like simple as like a game like Tetris or playing Patchwork and having the pieces slot together. I don't know what the actual psychology sort of concept for this is, but that's a different type of joy that feels really rewarding as a human.
That's so interesting and speaks really closely to like what I was feeling playing Sagrada last night and like clicking a die into place. Like, again, I don't know how to describe it, but like somewhere in my core, I'm like, that feels good.
I think I've heard, this is a little different but related. I've heard the design, Rob Davia, the guy who's kind of created the legacy format. He's talked a little bit about the psychology of opening things for the first time. And that is like that. Oftentimes people will open their games and like that is the biggest moment of joy for them, just to open a game for the first time. And he's kind of brought that into legacy games with opening boxes. It's not exactly pattern completion, but I like that you said that. I like designers that pay attention to those little bursts of endorphins, again, that give you that sense of satisfaction when you're playing games.
All right, I've got one more. And so my last one is that, and I think this is related to the learning and the joy in learning that comes with games. But I think as humans, we are, what we do is tell stories, and games are so good for telling stories with your friends. Mm-hmm. And that's not just, I'm someone who generally prefers more Euro style strategy games. And even in those, like, there are incredible narratives that are built each and every time you play the game. To me, like, every game really is a story game. And I think there's a lot of really powerful and fun learning that comes from that, as well as just sharing that experience. One thing that I think about a lot in sort of the stories is like social deduction games. We've mentioned the Resistance on here. And I think the experience of being somebody who's telling the truth and being told by the group, being accused by the group and being told that you're lying and you realize everything you're saying is just making you sound more and more guilty was like truly a profound experience for me, where it's like, this is, to some extent what it must be like to be accused of like a crime, and people are saying you're guilty of this thing. And, no matter what you say, it's kind of sounds bad coming from an accused person. So, I mean, to me, that was like just one powerful moment. But I just think games as opportunity to tell stories, to learn from stories, to experience different things are all reasons that I just really value playing games and in this hobby in general.
Yeah, games tell stories more organically, better than like almost any other device humans have ever created, which is really cool that we've created these physical things that then we can like put stories on top of. Even games that you wouldn't think would tell stories very well. Now I've like set myself up to be on the precipice of this. And I don't have a good example, but we like to put stories just in random places, right? When you're playing a game that doesn't seem like it might fit, even like The Fox and the Forest, the story in that game, it's a trick-taking game, it's a card game, there's characters in it. It doesn't naturally tell a story, but my brain wants to put one there, and it will find a way to like bring all of those disparate pieces together. And I love that about games, that it invites you to create story where there might not really be anything holding it together.
How about soccer again? Like going back to that, right? It's just a game about, trying to put a ball into a net behind the people. But when we think about something like that, we don't think in the mechanics of the game. It's a game of heroes and villains, controversy, unfairness and like, righteous victory. And I think that's just the way humans are oriented to create stories where, maybe there's not naturally one. We see it anyway.
Yeah.
I recently played Sleeping Gods, the first campaign of Sleeping Gods, which has a written narrative that you're following. So it's telling you a story and you're participating in that story. And the next day, on Sunday, I played Hallertau, which is the new game from Uwe Rosenberg, another farming game from Uwe Rosenberg. And it was interesting to see that difference between the narrative being told to me in Sleeping Gods that I really loved, and then in Hallertau, where there's no story at all like that, but we were each telling our own story of the farms. Like by the end of the game, I had one field because I just didn't want fields. I decided I didn't want many fields. I wanted to pursue a strategy, and that told a story in a very otherwise kind of dry Euro game. So I like that. There are all these types, and you mentioned Resistance, very different types of games there that I got a story out of that makes those memorable moments in games. I love that.
I totally agree. I just want to pull out a little nugget there. I think you just gave Mr. Rosenberg his next title, Another Farming Game by Uwe Rosenberg.
I heard there's lots of rocks in this one, though.
There are lots of rocks. Yeah, you have to clear the rocks to improve your farmhouse. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that is a pretty good natural stopping point for this conversation. Jamey, you have any final thoughts? I want to make sure you've been able to get it all out there.
I got it. I mean, I guess the one little note that I had to myself that, like you talked about components, I almost put that games remove screens when I play games because I like them on the tabletop. But I didn't end up saying that because I have appreciated being able to play games digitally during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. It's still a game to me. There's still a lot of the experience there. It's not exactly what I want, but it is still there. So that was kind of fourth on my list, the idea that I could take a break from screens. And that is still true, but it's just changed a little bit during the pandemic.
Definitely.
A lifesaver having some of these opportunities to play online, to stay connected while we're distant and all of that.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Jamey. Really appreciate you coming on. I look forward to seeing you soon on the disc golf course, and that'll be a lot of fun too. If you're new to this podcast, please feel free to give us a follow. We are on Twitter at Decision Spa. That's Decision SPA. And you should be able to find this podcast on YouTube or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. So thanks again, Jamey, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Brendan. It was great to meet you and be a part of this conversation. And I'm following you right now at Decision Spa.
Likewise, Jamey. Thank you so much for coming in. And hopefully you get cozy with us in the Decision Spa on Twitter.
You are now exiting the decision space. Thanks for listening. Please take care and enjoy the rest of your game.